Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're stretching our English conversation muscles with a real day, not a perfect fantasy routine. We'll move from waking up to work, from lunch to evening, and we'll keep the language natural, flexible, and alive. No textbook stiffness today, just honest, everyday speech.
Yeah, and before we dive in, let me say this. If your day feels messy, that's not a language problem. That's just life. So we're going to talk the way real people talk when they're tired, rushed, distracted, or pleasantly surprised by small things like coffee, quiet moments, and finishing one task on time.
Exactly. And one reason this kind of practice matters is that English changes shape depending on what you're describing. You don't speak the same way about a sunrise, a meeting, a traffic jam, and a calm evening at home. Each part of the day has its own mood, and your words should match that mood.
That's the fun part, honestly. A good day story is full of movement. You can say you woke up, sure, but you can also say you hesitated, you dragged yourself out of bed, you slowly came online, or you were already thinking about the day before your feet even touched the floor. Same idea, way more life.
So let's start with the first scene, morning. Not the polished version, the real one. I mean, the version where your alarm is loud, your blanket feels like a legal contract, and your brain is still negotiating with the fact that the day has technically begun, whether you agree with it or not.
Right, and the interesting thing is that people often think mornings are just one action, but they're usually several tiny battles. There's the battle with the alarm, the battle with the snooze button, the battle with the idea of standing up, and then the final battle of pretending you're fine once you're actually moving.
Honestly, the snooze button deserves its own drama series. It's always just one more minute. And then somehow, those minutes become a whole emotional negotiation. You know that feeling where you're awake enough to worry, but not awake enough to act? That's morning for a lot of us.
And when you finally do sit up, there's this weird half state, right? You're not sleeping, but you're not fully present either. You're kind of floating between worlds. And that's a great phrase to use in English when you want to describe someone who is physically there, but mentally lagging behind.
Yes, and I like that image because it sounds human. We don't have to say, I woke up at 7. We can say, I came to slowly, or I needed a minute to feel like a person, or my brain was still loading. Those phrases are vivid, and they make your speaking sound much more natural.
And let's be real, sometimes your first thought in the morning is not wisdom. It's usually something like, not yet, or I need 5 more minutes, or if I don't move, maybe the day won't find me. Those lines are funny because they're true, and truth is great fuel for good speaking.
Absolutely. So after the alarm and the hesitation, maybe you reach for your phone, or maybe you try not to. That choice can change the whole tone of the morning. If you open your phone right away, suddenly your mind is full of messages, reminders, and other people's energy before you've even found your own.
That's a strong point. I think a lot of learners can relate to that because the morning can go from quiet to crowded in 2 seconds. And in English, you can express that shift with phrases like, my brain went from calm to chaotic, or the day hit me before I was ready. Those are useful, lively expressions.
Now imagine the opposite. Imagine you sit quietly for a moment, maybe on the edge of the bed, maybe in the kitchen, maybe by a window, and you just let the day begin without rushing it. That's not dramatic, but it's powerful, and English needs those smaller, calmer moments too.
Yeah, because real life is not always dramatic. Sometimes it's just a person breathing, making a choice, and deciding not to start with panic. And when you describe that in English, you can say, I gave myself a minute, or I tried not to rush, or I wanted a softer start to the day.
Then comes getting ready, which sounds simple until you actually do it. Clothes, hair, toothbrush, bag, keys, water bottle, maybe breakfast if you're lucky. All of that sounds routine, but the language can be surprisingly rich if you describe the feeling behind it instead of just naming the tasks.
Exactly. Instead of I got dressed, you might say I threw something on if it was fast, or I spent too long deciding what to wear if you were stuck, or even I wanted to look presentable without putting in too much effort, which is a very normal human sentence.
And breakfast is another great example. Some people want a proper meal, some people want coffee and silence, and some people are just trying to survive the first hour. So you might say, I had something quick, or I didn't feel like eating much, or I needed caffeine more than food.
That last one is extremely relatable. And the nice thing is that all of this helps learners move away from robotic phrasing. If you only say, I ate breakfast, you've given information, but not atmosphere. If you say, I grabbed a quick bite because I was running late, now we can feel the scene.
Right. Atmosphere matters. And after breakfast, there's that little doorway moment, the final check before you leave. Keys, phone, wallet, headphones, the one thing you almost always forget. It's such a tiny part of the day, but it's also a classic universal moment, which makes it perfect for practice.
I love the doorway moment because it's so human. It's that last pause where you tell yourself, okay, do I have everything? And then you still turn around because you're not entirely sure. It's a small ritual, but it gives structure to the morning and makes your story feel real.
And then you step outside, which is almost like entering a different scene entirely. Inside is private, slow, maybe a little messy. Outside is movement. People are already in motion, cars are passing, doors are closing, coffee cups are in hands, and the day feels like it's been going for a while.
That transition is important. In English, you can describe it as leaving one world and entering another. That's more expressive than just saying, I left home. You might say, the moment I stepped outside, everything felt faster. Or, the street was already awake before I was.
So now let's talk about the commute, because that's where a lot of people feel the first real shift in energy. Whether you walk, drive, take the bus, ride the train, or sit in traffic, the commute tends to be the part of the day where your personal bubble meets the rest of the world.
And that's why it's such a good topic for speaking practice. You can talk about what you saw, what you heard, and how you felt. Maybe the bus was crowded, maybe the train was quiet, maybe traffic was terrible. Maybe you had a rare, peaceful ride and didn't want it to end.
I think one of the best English phrases for that is, I was on autopilot. It's short, but it says a lot. It means you were functioning, moving, and perhaps even smiling at the right times, but your mind was still waking up or drifting through the scene rather than fully engaging with it.
Yes, and another one is I was half asleep. That phrase works beautifully when you're describing a morning commute because it instantly paints the mood. You can hear the tiredness in it, you can hear the slow pace, the blank stare, the coffee dependency, all of it.
And then there are the little observations that make a commute feel like a story instead of a route. Maybe someone was laughing loudly. Maybe someone was staring out the window like they were in a music video. Maybe someone was speaking very seriously on the phone while holding a tiny sandwich. That's real life.
Totally. You can say, I noticed a lot of different people on the way, or the commute felt like a moving crowd, or I just watched everyone around me and tried not to think about my to-do list yet. That last part is important because the commute often becomes the mental doorway to work.
And sometimes the commute is actually where your English gets interesting because you can describe the mood of the city or town around you. Busy sidewalks, early commuters, shop lights turning on, buses stopping, people moving with purpose. Those details make your speaking feel cinematic instead of flat.
Cinematic is a good word for it, and learners often forget that everyday moments can sound beautiful if you phrase them well. You don't need poetry every time, but you do need texture. A sentence like, "The city looked half asleep but already busy," gives us a strong picture in very few words.
Now, if you work from home, the commute might be much shorter, but there's still a transition. You might walk from the bedroom to the kitchen or from the sofa to your desk, and even that tiny movement can feel like crossing into a different part of your day.
Exactly. The geography changes, even if it's only 3 steps. And the interesting part is the mental shift. When you sit down to begin work, your brain often resists. It says, "Are we really starting now?" That's a useful line in English because it captures both humor and reluctance.
So let's move into work, school, or whatever your main responsibility is. This is usually where the day gets less dreamy and more practical. Emails, tasks, deadlines, meetings, notes, messages, maybe a little hope, maybe a little fear, and definitely some sense that time is moving faster than expected.
I like how you said that, because work time is often a mix of momentum and pressure. You might begin with energy, but then the first message arrives, then another, then a request, then a problem, and suddenly you're not just doing one thing, you're juggling several things in your head at once.
And that's exactly the kind of moment where English can become much more expressive. Instead of saying, "I worked," you might say, "I opened my laptop and everything came at me at once." Or, "I felt buried under messages." Or, "I had too many tabs open in my brain." That last one is very useful.
Because it's visual, people instantly understand it. And it works whether you're talking about a computer, a phone, or your actual attention span. The phrase suggests scattered focus, mental clutter, and that slightly overwhelmed feeling when you don't know what to answer first.
Right. And then there's the question of priorities. If you're overwhelmed, a smart move is to pause and ask, "What matters most right now?" That sentence can fit a lot of situations, and it sounds thoughtful, not robotic. It shows that you're managing the day instead of being swallowed by it.
That's a really good line, and it's practical too, because English learners often know the vocabulary for tasks, but not always the language for decision-making. So phrases like, "I had to decide what was urgent," or "I needed to figure out where to start," are incredibly valuable in real life.
And if you want to sound even more natural, you can add your reaction to it. "I had too much to do, so I just sat there for a second." Or, "I felt stuck, but then I picked one small thing and started there." That sounds human, because human beings need starts, not just lists.
Absolutely. Start small. That's a lesson for productivity, but also for language. You don't need to describe your whole workday in one giant sentence. You can break it down into pieces. First, I opened my laptop. Then I checked messages. Then I tried to decide what mattered most. That rhythm sounds real.
And the rhythm of the day changes depending on the time. Some people have their best focus in the morning, when the room is quiet and the mind is fresh. Others don't really wake up until later. So if you say, "Mornings are my strong point," that gives us both your schedule and your personality.
Or you could say, "I work best before lunch," which is simple and clear. And if you want to describe the opposite, you could say, "By afternoon, my energy starts dropping." Or, "I'm still working, but not at the same level." Those are honest ways to talk about performance without sounding dramatic.
A lot of learners ask how to describe multitasking, and honestly, sometimes the answer is with caution. Because if you say, I was doing 3 things at once, that's fine. But if you add, and none of them got enough attention, now the sentence becomes much more meaningful and realistic.
Yeah, because multitasking is not always impressive. Sometimes it's just messy. You can say, I kept jumping between tasks, or I was trying to finish everything at the same time, or I felt scattered. That last one is especially good because it describes both mental state and performance.
And when you're speaking about work, I think honesty is stronger than perfection. If your morning was productive, great. If it was slow, also fine. If you had to restart 3 times because your attention kept slipping away, that's still a very normal and very relatable part of the day.
Exactly. And listeners learn more when the story includes that kind of truth. For example, I started strong, then lost focus, then had to pull myself back together, is much more useful than a flat summary. It gives learners vocabulary for recovery, which is a huge part of real communication.
Let's pause on that word, recovery, because it matters. A lot of people think the only important part is the beginning, but in real life, you often have to recover from distractions, interruptions, bad moods, poor sleep, or just a slow start. Language that describes recovery is incredibly practical.
And it can be subtle, too. You don't always need I recovered. You might say, I got back on track, or I found my rhythm again, or I settled into the work after a while. Those phrases are gentle, natural, and they carry the feeling of moving from chaos toward order.
Now, let's bring in meetings, because those are a whole category of human experience. Some are useful, some are long, some are confusing, and some seem to exist only because calendars enjoy suffering. But from an English perspective, they're fantastic material because they involve listening, reacting, agreeing, disagreeing, and waiting.
Waiting is the key word there. In meetings, you often spend a lot of time listening, nodding, and trying to figure out when it's your turn to speak. So the language you use can be very natural. I was following along, I chimed in when I could, I had a question but waited until the end.
Exactly. And that's valuable because everyday conversation isn't always about making a big speech. Sometimes it's about small responses, like, right, exactly, that makes sense, or I'm not sure I agree. Those tiny reactions keep communication alive, and they're important in every language.
And if a meeting is especially tiring, you can say, it went on longer than expected, or by the end, I was mentally done, or I was still there physically, but my attention had left earlier. That's honest, funny, and very understandable. People will relate to it immediately.
I also think people underestimate the language of interruption. In real life, your focus gets broken by a message, a sound, a question, a problem, or a thought. Saying, I got interrupted is useful, but you can go further. I lost my train of thought, or something pulled me away, or I had to switch gears.
Switch gears is a great phrase. It works for work, school, and even home life. And it sounds natural because it borrows from driving and movement. English is full of these little images, and once you start noticing them, your speaking gets a lot more flexible and vivid.
That flexibility is what we're aiming for here. Not memorizing one perfect sentence, but building a toolbox. If you can say, I was overwhelmed, I felt scattered, I got back on track, and I was running on autopilot, you can describe a whole range of experiences without sounding repetitive.
And repetition is okay sometimes, but variety keeps listeners interested. If you're telling the story of your day, you want some texture. Maybe your morning was slow, your commute was busy, your work was chaotic, and your evening was quiet. That contrast helps the story breathe.
Now, let's say lunch arrives. beautiful word, by the way. Lunch often feels less like a meal and more like a border crossing. You're moving from the first half of the day into the second, and that little break can completely change your energy, your mood, and your patience.
Totally. If you're hungry, everything feels harder. Tiny problems suddenly look huge, and your brain starts asking rude questions like, why is this email so complicated? Or why is this chair uncomfortable? So saying, I really needed lunch is both practical and expressive.
And if you actually take a break, you can describe that too. I stepped away from my desk. I took a few minutes to eat without rushing. Or I tried not to look at my screen while I was eating. Those are normal, clean, useful sentences for real life.
I like the phrase, I stepped away, because it suggests more than physical movement. It suggests a mental pause. You're not just changing locations, you're giving your attention a short vacation. That's a very natural thing to do, and it's nice to be able to talk about it clearly.
And lunch can also be social. Maybe you eat with coworkers, classmates, family, or a friend. Maybe you talk about nothing important, which is actually very important sometimes. In English, you can say, we caught up, we talked about random things, or it was a nice break from the day.
That's a great reminder that not every conversation needs a deep topic. Sometimes the best part of a lunch break is the lightness. You're not solving the world's problems, you're just being human for 10 or 15 minutes, and that matters more than people think.
After lunch, the energy changes. The morning's sharpness starts to soften. You might feel alert again, or you might feel sleepy, or you might feel like your brain is somewhere between the two. That in-between feeling is extremely common, and English has plenty of ways to express it.
For example, I hit a slump, or my energy dipped, or I felt the afternoon drag a bit. Those are all very natural. And if you want something a little more colorful, you can say, my brain quietly checked out for a while, which is informal but very vivid.
I love that because it's honest without being too heavy. The point is not to perform productivity. It's to describe what actually happened. Maybe you had a second wind. Maybe you struggled through the last few hours. Maybe you were productive in a slower way. All of that belongs in real speech.
And there's a useful distinction here. Being busy is not always the same as being effective. So if you say, I was rushing but not finishing much, that gives a more accurate picture than just saying, I was busy all afternoon. That accuracy makes your English more interesting and more useful.
Good point. And if something went wrong, that's also great material. A deadline got moved, a file didn't save, a conversation became confusing, a plan changed. You can say, the afternoon got a little messy, or I had to deal with a few surprises, and now the listener can feel the shape of the day.
Yeah, and surprises are such a normal part of life that describing them well is a major skill. You don't need big, dramatic vocabulary. Sometimes the best sentence is just, things didn't go exactly as planned. Simple, honest, and flexible.
As the day moves on, some people hit a point where they need to make a choice, keep pushing or slow down. That choice is often more important than people admit. You can work all day in a scattered, exhausted way, or you can stop at the right time and save energy for tomorrow.
And the language for that is useful too. You might say, I decided to wrap up, or I called it a day, or I kept going a little longer than I should have. Those expressions are common, natural, and full of real-life timing. They tell us not just what you did, but how you handled your limits.
Exactly. And limits are part of every realistic day story. Nobody is productive forever. People slow down, people get tired, people lose focus, and people recover. That's why storytelling matters in language learning. It teaches you to talk about human rhythm, not just tasks and time.
And I think learners actually sound more confident when they admit that kind of rhythm. It's more believable to say, I was strong in the morning, weaker in the afternoon, and then I picked up again after a break, than to claim every hour was equally amazing. Real language sounds like life, not a brochure.
Then comes the end of work or school, and that transition is almost always emotional. Sometimes you feel relieved. Sometimes you feel unfinished. Sometimes you're proud. Sometimes you're tired. Sometimes all of those things happen at once, which is honestly very on brand for a full day.
And if you're trying to describe that moment, there are so many good options. I logged off, I shut my laptop, I packed up my things, I took a deep breath, I was glad to be done, I still had things on my mind. Those phrases give you plenty of range.
I like still had things on my mind because it feels true without being dramatic. It says the day didn't disappear instantly. Some of it followed you home, which is normal. That's why the transition into the evening often needs a small ritual or pause.
Yes, because if you rush from work mode straight into home mode, your body's there, but your mind is still replying to emails. So the little pause matters. You can say, I gave myself a minute before starting the evening, or I needed a transition before doing anything else.
That transition might happen in the car, on the train, on the sidewalk, or just standing in your doorway after you get home. The place doesn't matter as much as the feeling. You're moving from performance into rest, and that shift deserves language that matches its importance.
And once you're home, the first moment is often underrated. You put things down, you take off shoes, you breathe differently. You maybe sit for a second and let your shoulders drop. In English, that can become, I finally relaxed, or I let the day go, or I felt myself unwind.
Great phrase, unwind. It sounds exactly like what it means. And the evening can start in many ways. Some people cook, some people order food, some people go for a walk, some people talk to family, and some people just need silence. None of that is wrong. The key is describing the choice clearly.
Right, so if you cooked, you can say, I made something simple. If you ordered food, you can say, I didn't have energy to cook. If you went for a walk, you can say, I wanted to clear my head. Each sentence shows both action and motivation, which makes your English sound richer.
And the evening has two main personalities, if you ask me. One is intentional and gentle. The other is accidental and slippery. The intentional one looks like a calm meal, a conversation, a book, maybe music, maybe a quiet show, maybe just time without pressure. It feels grounded and restful.
The accidental one starts with one tiny click. I'll just check something for a minute. And then you know the rest. Notifications, videos, scrolling, more scrolling, a weird sense of time disappearing, and suddenly it's much later than you expected. That's a very real modern experience.
And the best way to describe that in English is to be specific about the feeling. I fell into a scroll hole. I lost track of time. I kept meaning to stop. Or I ended up more tired than relaxed. Those expressions are vivid because everyone understands the trap immediately.
I also think people appreciate honesty about rest. Rest is not just not working. Rest is a quality. You can rest badly by staying overstimulated, or rest well by choosing something that actually calms you. So saying, I didn't really recharge is a meaningful sentence.
Yes, and that's such an important distinction. If you spend the evening on your phone and then feel drained, you didn't fail at relaxing. You just chose a kind of rest that didn't help much. That's very normal, and it's useful to have language for that difference.
Maybe that's one of the biggest lessons in this whole conversation. The day is not just what happened, but how it felt. Two people can both say, I worked all day, but one might mean focused and calm, while the other means stressed and scattered. Context changes everything.
Exactly. And if we're teaching speaking, we have to teach that feeling layer. Otherwise, people end up sounding like a calendar. Nobody wants that. We want sentences that carry mood, contrast, timing, and personality. That's where the real communication lives.
So maybe let's practice that idea with a simple frame. Instead of saying only, I woke up, you can say, I woke up slowly and didn't want to move. Instead of I went to work, you can say I headed to work with too many thoughts in my head. Instantly more natural.
And instead of I had lunch, you can say I finally took a break and ate something simple. Instead of I finished work, you can say I wrapped up earlier than usual because I needed some breathing room. These are small changes, but they make a huge difference.
That's why this style of practice is so effective. You're not memorizing a list, you're learning patterns. The pattern is simple: action plus feeling plus detail. If you can do that, you can talk about almost any ordinary day in a way that sounds vivid and believable.
And let's not forget the social side of speaking. When you tell a day story to a friend, you don't narrate every minute. You choose the parts that matter. The weird commute, the forgotten lunch, the meeting that dragged, the quiet walk home, the little moment that made you smile.
Yeah, storytelling is selective. You're not listing facts, you're shaping experience. That means you can leave out the boring parts and highlight what feels meaningful. That's very useful in English because it helps your speech feel organized without sounding rehearsed.
Now, imagine someone asks you, "How was your day?" A beginner might say, "It was good," or "It was busy." That's fine, but it's not the full picture. A stronger answer might be, "It started slowly, got hectic around midday, and ended quietly." That's much more alive.
And the best part is, that sentence already teaches vocabulary. Slowly, hectic, around midday, quietly. You're not just answering a question, you're creating a timeline with texture. That's a really strong habit to build in English because it works in conversations, interviews, and even casual small talk.
Let's also talk about pace. Some days are fast, some are slow, some feel stretched, and some feel compressed. You might say, "The morning flew by," or "The afternoon dragged," or "The whole day felt packed." Those are common phrases, and they help you describe time emotionally, not just numerically.
That's huge, because time is never just time. It feels different depending on stress, interest, sleep, and mood. So if you can say, the day dragged because I was tired, or the morning flew because I was busy, you're giving people a real sense of your experience.
And once you can describe your own day like that, it becomes easier to ask about someone else's. How was your morning? Did your afternoon go smoothly? Was your commute terrible? Those are small conversational doors, and good English is often just knowing how to open those doors gently.
Exactly. And when someone answers, you can follow up with natural reactions. Oh, wow, that sounds exhausting. Nice. No way. I know that feeling. Ugh, been there. Those short responses keep the conversation human, which is really the whole goal here.
So maybe we should summarize the day in simple language, but still keep it real. Morning can be slow and awkward. Midday can be productive or stressful. Afternoon can be messy or flat. Evening can be restful or distracting. The point is not perfection. The point is noticing the movement.
Yes, and noticing gives you better words. If you notice that your morning was groggy, your afternoon was intense, and your evening was calm, then you can actually tell the story of your day instead of just labeling it. That's a big shift for learners, and it's a useful one.
I also want to say something about confidence. People often think they need advanced vocabulary before they can speak naturally, but that's not true. The most important thing is using common words well. Simple words like tired, calm, rushed, crowded, quiet, late, early, and relieved can tell a very strong story.
And when you combine them with small actions, the story becomes even better. I felt tired, so I took it slow. I was rushed, but I stayed focused. The room was quiet, and I finally relaxed. That's the kind of English that sounds clear and human at the same time.
Maybe the best habit is to ask yourself at the end of the day, not just, what did I do, but how did it feel? That one question opens the door to richer English. It pushes you toward emotion, sequence, and memory, which are the ingredients of good conversation.
Yeah, and it also helps you remember. We remember feelings better than lists. So if you say, I was overwhelmed in the morning but calmer after lunch, that's not only more expressive, it's also more memorable. And memorable language is the language that sticks.
All right, let's do a little practical language work inside the conversation. If I say, I woke up late, you might expand it to, I woke up late and had to rush to get ready. If I say, I worked all day, you might expand it to, I worked all day, but I kept losing focus in the afternoon.
And if I say, I got home, you could turn that into, I got home and needed a few minutes before I could talk to anyone. See? Same core idea, but now it sounds like a real moment with a real emotional shape. That's the kind of expansion that builds speaking confidence.
Let's keep going with a few more examples, because examples are where learners usually go, oh, I can say that. You can say, my morning was chaotic, my day was productive, my lunch break was short, or my evening was quiet. But if you want more life, add one detail to each.
Like, my morning was chaotic because I kept forgetting things. My day was productive once I got started. My lunch break was short, but it helped. My evening was quiet, and I really needed that. Those little endings transform the sentence from report to experience.
And that transformation is exactly what we want. Speaking English well is not only about grammar accuracy, it's also about human accuracy. Does the sentence sound like something a real person would say in a real situation? If yes, you're on the right track.
Right, and human accuracy is a great phrase for this whole approach. If the sentence feels alive, it usually works. If it feels like a form you fill out at an office, it probably needs more texture. So we keep adjusting, adding feeling, and listening for what sounds natural.
I think one more thing people need permission to do is pause. You don't have to fill every silence. In conversation, a small pause can make you sound thoughtful, calm, and natural. That matters in English because speech is not a race, it's a rhythm.
Exactly. And when you're telling a story about your day, pauses help the listener follow your pace. You can say, well, the morning was rough, or, the afternoon got better after lunch, or, honestly, the evening was my favorite part. Those little openers sound very natural.
So if you're practicing right now, try not to translate word for word from your first language. Think about the feeling first, then choose the simplest English that carries that feeling. That's often how fluent speech begins, not with perfect sentences, but with honest ones.
And if the honest sentence is simple, that's okay. I was tired. Great. I was tired, so I went to bed early. Even better. I was tired, so I went to bed early and skipped my usual scrolling. Now we've got a real story, and a pretty relatable one at that.
We're getting close to the end, so let's bring all the parts together. A day can start with hesitation, move into motion, get complicated at work, soften at lunch, wobble in the afternoon, and then settle into evening. That's not boring. That's the shape of human life.
And the more clearly you can describe that shape, the more comfortably you can speak English in everyday situations. Not every conversation needs a big topic. Sometimes the best practice is just talking about your day in a way that sounds real, warm, and easy to follow.
So here's the challenge for you. Tonight or tomorrow, try telling your own day out loud. Don't use just the bare facts. Add one feeling, one detail, and one transition. That's enough to make your English sound more natural right away.
And if you want a super simple formula, use this. What happened, how it felt, and what changed. That one pattern can carry a lot of conversation. It can take you from I woke up to I woke up slowly, felt groggy, and got moving after coffee.
I love that. Because once you start speaking like that, English stops feeling like homework and starts feeling like a tool for sharing your life. That's the whole point of learning language. Not collecting sentences, but connecting through them.
And connecting is easier when you sound like yourself. So don't worry about being fancy. Worry about being clear, warm, and honest. If you can do that, your stories will already sound much better, even with simple vocabulary and everyday grammar.
All right, let's do a fast recap in conversation form. Morning, wake up slowly, negotiate with the alarm, maybe avoid the phone. Daytime, get through work, meetings, tasks, and the occasional distraction. Lunch, reset. Afternoon, push through, regroup, finish what matters. Evening, rest, recharge, or scroll by accident.
That recap is perfect because it mirrors real life without sounding stiff, and learners can copy the structure for their own stories. You don't have to memorize all 200 words of a perfect paragraph. You just need a few solid patterns that let you speak without freezing.
Exactly. And if you ever get stuck, remember that ordinary details are enough. Coffee, traffic, a quiet desk, a crowded train, a long meeting, a short lunch, a peaceful walk home. These aren't small topics. These are the pieces that make a day feel real.
And if you say them well, people listen. Because everybody has a day. Everybody has mornings that feel heavy and evenings that feel strange. That shared experience is what makes this kind of English so useful. It helps you talk about the common stuff that everyone understands.
So let's end the way we began. Not with perfection, but with honesty. Your day does not need to be extraordinary to be worth talking about. It just needs a voice. And with the right words, even the most ordinary morning can become a story worth telling.
And that story can be calm, funny, tired, hopeful, messy, or all of the above. That's what makes it human. So go ahead and practice your own version, and don't be afraid to sound like a real person while you do it.
Thanks for hanging out with us and walking through a full day in English. We hope the phrases, the rhythm, and the little details give you something useful to hold on to. Keep listening, keep speaking, and keep making your English feel more alive.
Yeah, and remember, your life already has plenty of material. You just need the words that fit it. We'll see you next time for another conversation that sounds less like a lesson and more like real